It is Friday, December 29th, 2023. This is another edition of Football Today. You know that dude, Bobby Skinner from the Talking Giants world. I am Chris Rose, producer Mikey along for the ride as well. Do I have a little extra smile today? Do I?
Yeah, it looks like you really enjoyed the Pop-Tart Bowl last night.
Yes, I did. Well, I don't think I'll ever get through that trophy presentation again. I'll never look at a Pop Tart the same way.
So I stayed for the trophy presentation,
Hmm.
and I was a little upset because I was there, yeah, right? And I was like, I want to stay for the trophy presentation, everything. It helps that there's no traffic, leaving the Camping World Stadium in
Hmm.
Orlando. And I'm like, I'm waiting for these cats to start biting the mascot, right? Like I figured, like maybe he'd go put a new costume on because it'd be tough to walk around edible. So he just goes in the toaster and they just put out a giant Pop Tart out. So I thought they were actually going to take bites off of the mascot like while he was walking around.
Wait a second. You wanted them to actually sink their teeth into a live mascot?
Yeah, well, not his actual, it's flesh and bones, but like the outer parts of it.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of what we got when they, reproduced a new edible Pop Tart?
No, because there's no mascot in there. It's just a giant
Okay.
Pop Tart with some eyes on it.
Hmm.
I needed the mask. I was just sitting there waiting. Like, when are they going to start taking chomps at this guy?
Okay. Our Thursday nights were a little bit different. That's all I can say. Let's talk a little bit about these guys. The Cleveland Browns, their magical ride continued last night as they officially clinched a playoff berth for just the third time since they came back into the league in 1999. Joe Flacco did it again against one of his old teams in the New York Jets. Another 300-yard passing game. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the shock factor out of the Flacco story?
I'd say like a 7 or 8, right? Because he did start last year for the Jets, and he surely wasn't good, but he wasn't like worst starter in the league type stuff. He probably was their best starter. Over Zach Wilson, and then did he get hurt? I can't remember why they went to Mike White over Joe Flacco, but they did. Um, it's just that like Kevin Stefanski's always been a good offensive coach. Just needed someone
Mhm.
to like be halfway accurate, and Flacco still got that. But yeah, it is shocking. But I'm not shocked that this team is good with like even just competent quarterback play.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the shock value, and which is why I would put it at like 8 or 9. Like I remember the morning after the Baltimore game, uh, Browns fans were feeling great, right? Deshaun Watson had completed every pass in the second half, and they came from behind to edge Baltimore on a last second kick. And so the Browns were like, oh my God, like Watson's turned the corner. This is it. They're pointed in the right direction, even without Nick Chubb, even without some other personnel. They feel like, oh my God, Watson is here. And I started getting texts the minute I woke up that, oh my God, Watson's out the season, the whole bit. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, we had been yanked, the chain had been yanked. We were all marching in the same direction. Then this happens. And then you're like, okay, well, DTR, PJ Walker, like what? And then you heard these rumblings that they were working out Joe Flacco. And I was like, what? Like, out of all the guys, we're going to work out Joe Flacco? And this is incredible. I mean, I dare I say that outside of his postseason 2012 run, that this is the best we have ever seen. And this is without mini camp. This is without training camp. This is without one preseason rep. Anything. Throwing the ball to his old man and his brother and his kids. And this is it. Like it really is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe Flacco back in the day got overrated because of the Super Bowl, and then in turn became underrated because it kind of became a joke to like,
Mhm.
is Joe Flacco elite? Like, no, he wasn't elite, but he was a pretty damn good quarterback
Right.
for a lot of years in Baltimore. We forget that, but yeah, he got old. Denver was a mess, and then went to the Jets after that. Uh, I just, I, you know, I said it halfway through. I'm like, I really believe in this Browns team with Watson, right? Not because I don't think Watson's playing good, but it's like at least there's like capable quarterback play inside of him as long as he can stop screwing up. And I know Flacco's thrown his fair share of interceptions
Hmm.
with the Browns so far, but we've also seen him, turn it up in the playoffs, right? Like he was always kind of an interception guy, and then that Super Bowl run, I don't think he threw a single
Nope.
one.
Didn't.
Um, so they can get that offense dialed in. I mean, no Amari Cooper last night too. David Njoku looks like a top 5 tight end in the NFL since Joe Flacco showed up, which I think has been huge for them. To me, they are just as much a Super Bowl contender as any team in the AFC not named the Ravens. And they beat the Ravens.
Yeah, yeah, I think that they might be. They're definitely at least a half step behind the Ravens, but in 60 minutes of football, you never know. I will say this before we move on. I think Kevin Stefanski has done an incredible job, and for a franchise that has changed head coaches and personnel people the way most people go through T-shirts, it has been nothing short of remarkable what he has done. He has added a calming influence. I know a lot of people felt like he was on the hot seat going into this year, that they wanted to give him a full season with Deshaun Watson and see if that offense would work and everything. But he has pushed all the right buttons. There has been no panic. I mean, you heard the guys, you heard Herb Street talking about it last night in the game. They're starting their fourth and fifth tackles. They are getting a ton of play out of their fourth and fifth safeties. They're missing a ton of rotational pieces on their defensive line. They were without their top receiver. Then they lost Elijah Moore halfway through that game. They haven't had Nick Chubb for 97% of the season. And somehow they've continued to not only win, but beat good teams along the way. And I just think it shows you that, man, I know this league is built about depth, but it's getting guys to believe and looking them in the eye during training camp and saying, hey, you might not think that you're going to help us, but you are going to help us at some point.
The biggest thing you just mentioned to me is the tackles, right? Like I don't think people realize how big of a deal that is to not only lose your starting tackles, and it's not like Jedrick Wills was setting the world on fire or anything, but to get like your backup, like DeJuan Jones looking good, to get your backups tackles play, like it's hard to find starting tackle play in the NFL, and they've been able to operate offense. And I think that's like the sign of a coach is being able to scheme around bad offensive line play. And it's a credit to Bill Callahan, best
Yep.
offensive line coach in the game, probably.
Yep, I would agree. All right, let's move on to this weekend's action. We talked a little bit about the Ravens. They had that huge Monday night win in San Francisco. Well, now they can wrap up the 1 seed when they take on the Miami Dolphins, who still have their eyes on the 1 seed as well. After thrashing San Francisco on Monday night, does Miami stand a chance against Baltimore in this one?
Yep, we come away from that week thinking about like the big Baltimore win, but you forget Miami had a nice big win over the Dallas Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
The teams that have given Miami the most struggles, their offense, have been teams that like have safeties and linebackers who you can trust, who you can move around, throw different looks. And my gosh, what are the Baltimore Ravens on defense? If not that, you have Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, who are both, great in the run and coverage. You have Kyle Hamilton, who's the ultimate chess piece, who was like made for these matchups versus these type of offensive coordinators. I This is the toughest test for the Mike McDaniel offense all year long, like more so than Matt Milano and the Buffalo Bills in that early matchup. This is the toughest step. You got a full season worth of film. You are playing for a division championship to play Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, and Kyle Hamilton, and all the other cats they have on defense. This is a big game for Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins.
So Baltimore's won 9 of its last 10 games, and in that span, the Ravens are putting up nearly 31 points a game and only giving up right around 17 points per game. So they are taking it to a lot of good teams. It's going to be really interesting because Miami's number 1 in terms of scoring, points per game, yards per game, and Baltimore is number 1 in terms of points per game allowed and sacks and turnovers. So I think we're going to just be focusing on that. I think if Miami wins, the only way they're going to do that is if their defense continues to play well. And it has played great. Since week 11, they're allowing like 14 points per game or even less than that. And that's even better than Baltimore, which, as I just mentioned, is number 1 in terms of points per game allowed this year. So if they're able to bottle up Lamar, and I don't think they're going to be able to because he always breaks away for 1 or 2 or 3 plays. I mean, last year he thrashed him in that huge come-from-behind Miami win, but he was having a remarkable day against the Dolphins. So I think a lot of this is on Miami's defense. I think that out of the 4 units on the field, they're the least talked about, and I think it's the one where they're going to have to get something done because I think McDaniel will be able to scheme something against these Ravens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Vic Fangio who's one of the, better defensive
Hmm.
coordinators in the NFL. Been consistent that way. Like you have to play discipline versus Lamar and the Ravens, but even if you do play discipline, they have guys that can go above and beyond. But I don't think like so some of the 49ers issues this year, like they have a lot of talent on defense. They can be a little undisciplined and you can take advantage, whether it's, Chase Young, rushing too deep or, Hufanga getting a little too aggressive and getting guys out of place. Where Vic Fangio's not going to have that, right? Like that discipline is that or that defense is all about discipline. But to me, you have good play callers on both sides of the ball, and to me, I think the talent wins out. And you have the to me, Lamar's a much better quarterback than Tua, without even trying to disrespect Tua. Like who's gonna go against these well-structured defenses that have talent? To me, it's gonna be Lamar, and the Ravens defense has more talent than the Dolphins.
Yeah, and the thing about Lamar, and we've talked about this, we did at least earlier in the week, was that he could end up winning the MVP with some pretty mediocre quarterback numbers in today's games. But at the end of the day, you are going to remember between 3 and 5 plays of his every game. And particularly in marquee games like this one, he could just, whether it's a 12-yard scramble, whether it's a play where he keeps play alive and gets rid of the ball like he did against the Jaguars on that Sunday night football where Smoot is like looking at him. He's like, my God, I had you. And you still were able to keep the play alive and get it to Isaiah Likely. That's what he does. That is the difference maker. And I expect it to happen again. And I think the Ravens will wrap up the 1 seed, and the following Sunday will be meaningless for several teams, including the Ravens.
Do you believe this game's going to be tight?
Um,
The Ravens have blown teams out. It's kind of
I think that it could end up double digits, but I think it would be tighter than that, meaning like a late score that pushes it to 10.
right.
That's what I think.
Yeah, and you brought up but you did bring up good points about that Miami defense. Like because they don't really have like the star players that you really think of in the NFL, and Jalen Phillips got hurt.
Hmm.
They have been really good, and I think a lot comes from their safety play, like Javon Holland, like him and Vic Fangio's a great fit. I was
Really
just
good.
looking it up, EPA per play since week 10. Dolphins are number one, which is kind
Hmm.
of shocking.
Yeah.
So yeah, so even though they have talent, but they're not a team of castoffs, but you don't have like those star pass rushers or the guys that you really think of.
All right, let's move on to what was the biggest story, at least off the field this week in the NFL, which is that Russell Wilson is moving off of the field. He will not be the starting quarterback the last 2 games. Jared Stidham is going to get the call for the Broncos this weekend against the Los Angeles Chargers. Sean Payton did have a press conference, and he said, yeah, economics are part of it, but really it's about winning games. So there's a couple of things I want to focus on, but let's start with looking forward because there's a report by Diana Rossini of The Athletic that Russell Wilson expects to be released by March, and so he's going to find a new home. How much of a market is there for Russell? And wherever he lands, are we still talking about a Super Bowl caliber quarterback at this point?
I don't think we are. Like we're just he's not anymore, right? Like it hasn't been, even though the box score statistics are pretty good, for Russell Wilson. Like you watch him, like this is not consistently good quarterback play, right? It's a lot of times Russ will create his own pressure. And then now he still throws like a nice deep ball, like right. So they'll throw the ball to deep to Cortland Sutton 5 times a game and convert on some of those. But like there's no chemistry with some of the other receivers. I don't think he's a Super Bowl QB, despite the fact that the way that the Broncos have went about this to me is very shady and weird.
What way?
Well, one, they are still in the playoff hunt, and Russell Wilson is a better quarterback than Jared Stidham. Like that much is clear. And there's reports that they've been threatening him to bench him for like months if he doesn't waive his injury settlement part of his contract. Like that's to me, that's really fucking shitty to do to a quarterback who you've got starting week in, week out, and having just, you know, that no vote of confidence that like, hey, we are going to cut you after the year. We even if you kind of think it might happen, like it that doesn't breed anything. Well, that's going to breed like hate within the two, and I'm shocked that they've been able to have the success they have with the way that this has all went down.
I think to some degree that they have swayed the public opinion in the direction of Russell Wilson. And I don't think that Russell is everybody's cup of tea. I don't think he's immensely popular uh, in the NFL world amongst players. And I think he's maybe he's fine among players, right? I mean, you always heard the rift up in Seattle, particularly with the defensive players and Pete Carroll treating him with kid gloves and all of that sort of stuff. But I think that the public perception of Russell Wilson is, yeah, right? He says some stuff where you're like, really? Like, are we buying all this stuff that comes out of his mouth? Is it genuine? Is it not? Some people say that's exactly who he is, and some people say it isn't. But I think the pressure is now on Sean Payton, and it should be. There are some people that have been very critical of the way that he has gone after Russell Wilson from day one with his public comments, then attacked him on the sidelines. People have to remember a few things. Who did Sean Payton learn from? Who was
Parcells?
Yeah, who was his mentor? Bill Parcells. People aren't going to know this. Go back and look at the 1980s on the New York Giants sideline. It was almost a weekly occurrence where he and Phil Simms, the quarterback, were yelling at each other. And although Phil Simms wasn't as talented as Russell Wilson, he was a Super Bowl winning quarterback and a Super Bowl MVP winning quarterback at that. So that's where Sean Payton learned it, right? Kids learn the behavior from their parents. I think that's a little bit where Sean Payton may have learned this stuff. Was it a bad look a couple weeks ago in Detroit when he yelled at Russell Wilson? Yeah, but to me, like, that stuff happens. Like, when guys yell at each other in the dugout in the baseball world or on the sidelines in the NFL world, I'm not like, oh, that's so disrespectful. Like, that's the heat of the battle. And if you're not happy, and by the way, if Russ wanted to yell back at his coach, go ahead, yell back at his coach. It used to happen a lot more. People say, well, that could never happen. Well, it used to happen. So if you want to
Yeah,
go do it, go do it.
I don't mind that. My issue with the Peyton on this is like not the yelling or whatever, even though we never really truly figured out what that was.
Right.
The only
Oh,
thing that
because
made
Sean
sense was
Payton
that
said
he
that's
snapped
none
the
of your
ball too
business.
quickly or without letting them review. What'd you say? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said that because Sean Payton wouldn't answer the question. Somebody asked him, hey, what was that all about? And he said, well, it's none of your business. So whatever.
It's to me, it's just like you threatening to bench your quarterback, not because of his play, but because he wouldn't wait. Like that's fucked, right? Like that's the you guys gave. I know Sean Payton didn't give him that contract, but like the Denver Broncos gave him
Mm-hmm.
that contract, and to threaten the guy to you're going to bench him for that. And you know what? No one forced you to come coach here, Sean Payton. You always knew you were going to have to deal with this year one. Like I don't like that at all. And I think Sean Payton, who was what I loved about him in the media, is he was very willing to be open. But I feel like now he's kind of I don't know what the deal is exactly. I still think he's a good coach, but he needs to get his quarterback in there and get him in there quick, or it's all gonna go downhill.
Well, this is the thing. Now all the pressure is on Sean Payton, and it should be. By the way, he lucked into Drew Brees, right? The Miami Dolphins wouldn't pass him on a physical in 2006, and so
Never
he ended
forget.
up in New Orleans, right? And that marriage was perfect. So people were like, "Well, of course he can work with Russ. He's the same size as Drew Brees."
When
Like
there's
that's
the opposite quarterbacks, the only thing similar is their
totally.
size.
So, good luck going to find a quarterback. Good luck because maybe you could trade up and go get the guy you want, but it's not 100% certain, or go get somebody in free agency. Like, is that going to be 100% certain that you're going to find your guy? So for the first time in his career, Sean Payton has to go find somebody without lucking into him like he did with Drew Brees. Now, once he got Drew Brees in the building, I will give Sean Payton and Drew Brees all the credit. But let's not act like he said, okay, Drew Brees is my target. Nobody else wanted him. He was coming off of that shoulder injury. So it worked out. Here, I'm not so sure it's going to work out. They have given Sean Payton the keys to the car. They traded a first rounder for him. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, it's I just can't get over the for Brett threatening him for weeks. But here's where I want to find out more though, is because you talked about Russell Wilson not being maybe the most well liked is, and we saw last year as front and center how much the team was annoyed with him.
Hmm.
Is are they still that way to where they're like, what the hell was Peyton doing, threatening to him, or are they kind of relieved that hey, we don't have to deal with Russell Wilson being our quote unquote leader?
Well, neither one of us are in that Broncos locker room, nor do we cover them on a daily basis. But I will say this, having been around the sport, and you've been around the sport, players want to win. So even if you're an a-hole or not the most well-liked person in the building, if you are better than the guy that they are replacing you with, that's not going to sit well, particularly when it comes to money and stuff. Like players, those guys are laying their asses on the line every week for an organization. And if they don't feel like the organization is making the best decision to put them in position to win, how do you think that's going to sit with those guys?
Especially when you're in playoff contention too. Like they are not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, even though they're probably eliminated.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, there's a lot of shit that has to go right for the Broncos to even stay into it into week 18.
But is Sean Payton like talking about like, hey, we gotta, we got some, is he telling them we still have something worth fight for, or is he telling them, hey, we're basically out of this. We're making this decision now.
There's no way. So I just did that Vikings Bengals game with Jason McCourty, and I was having lunch with him, and we were talking a little bit about the Browns 0-17 season, 0-16 season that he was a part of. And he goes, I'm going to tell you something. I love the vibes in Cleveland. I love the guys. He goes, there was some stuff that was really screwed up, but there wasn't one week where I felt like we couldn't win. And we knew what they were trying to do, but there wasn't one week where we felt as players that we weren't going to get a W. So there's no way that the Broncos players, this is the way fans think, but players can't afford to think that way, that they're looking ahead to next year and all that sort of stuff, because A, they don't know if they're going to be on that team, and B, when you're putting your livelihood on the line, we know that it could end with any snap. You can't play football that way. You know that.
Especially for guys who are like impacted, like statistically, like those stats get pulled up in every contract negotiation. So guys are playing for free agent deals or whatever down the line. It's huge for them. So again, that's like I would love, maybe I should have looked up some Denver insiders, even though that feels like a team that kind of has all their reporters bought and paid for. Uh like what does the locker room actually feel like in there? Because I would feel pretty disrespected by if Sean Payton comes in and admits that he's benching the quarterback because of money.
We'll have to wait for the 30 for 30 in a few seasons on that one. All right, let's move on. There are several 8-7 teams in the AFC. Which one has the most on the line this weekend?
Well, first off, I want to ask you, do you think it's weird that we still call them 30 for 30s when originally it was 30 documentaries for 30 years of ESPN?
I didn't remember that until you just brought it up. So I would answer
But I
no.
feel like you had to, once people, because those were so well liked that you had to keep them. Anyways, the Houston Texans, man, I want to see CJ Stroud in the playoffs. Like it's simple as that. I don't need to go any deeper. The Texans, their left tackle Larry Tunsil. I just want to see CJ Stroud in the playoffs. He's done well against playoff teams. I want to see it.
I am going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Even though Kenny Pickett is healthy enough to play, they have decided that Mason Rudolph is the guy that they're going to go with on the road in Seattle. Did you find that decision a little bizarre?
Yeah, I mean, you drafted him in the first round last year.
Yeah.
And I know it hasn't been good, but like he hasn't been like disaster level like type quarterback play, right? It's just been not very good at all. And this is from Mason Rudolph. Like
Well,
I know they played well this last game, but like I'm not buying into that sample size.
but that's what I'm saying is that, to me, there's a lot on the line, not even in terms of Pittsburgh making it as a wild card or not. It's more along the lines of the future of this team. Because if you're picking Mason Rudolph, who wasn't even active for most of the year, as your guy in a must-win road game over the only guy who was taken in the first round of the 2022 NFL draft as a quarterback, doesn't that say something about the future of your franchise?
Well, to me, it's when these types of quarterback situations end up happening, right? Like where you pull a guy early. I don't question that maybe that decision in a vacuum, which with this one I do. Kenny Pickett's better than Mason Rudolph. Is why did you draft this guy in the first place? Because like to me, to draft a quarterback in the first round, you have to have a lot of conviction, and to get off of that, it has to take a lot. And it's like, why? So why did you take Kenny Pickett in the first round if you didn't have a lot of conviction? Like, this is the guy. We really believe in what he's about. We're gonna build with him through struggles, and you're throwing that all away. Like, it's not like he got benched. He got injured. Like, so I don't understand how they've gotten to this so quickly.
I will answer that question for you because they didn't have a quarterback plan when Ben Roethlisberger. Remember, for years, Roethlisberger walked that tightrope. Well, I'm thinking about retiring. Am I going to play? I mean, we all think that Aaron Rodgers loves attention. Ben Roethlisberger ate it up. Every year he would do that to the Steelers, right? And they couldn't pick a quarterback high. Why? Because they didn't want to hurt Benny's feelings. They didn't want to do that to him. I mean, we all remember when Mason Rudolph got picked. What round did he get picked in? Third or fourth or whatever? And people were like, "So Ben, are you going to help him out?" And he's like, "No." Now that's the same thing that happened with a lot of guys. There's a lot of veteran quarterbacks that aren't going to help prepare their eventual replacement. But I mean, that guy was so insecure about everything that he held the franchise hostage. So by the time Ben was really done, well, this is the year you got to go get somebody in the first round. You have to, whether or not he's a viable first round pick. I mean, look what we got. We don't have anything. We have to go get him now.
And to me, like for an organization like the Pittsburgh Steelers, like that's that's weird thinking for that's like, hey, we are consistent. We aren't going to overreact and fire everybody. To me, not being like, hey, we'll eat it this year. Like, we already paid Mitchell Trubisky like the biggest backup quarterback contract. We'll let him, and they ended up letting him start that season anyways. For Kenny Pickett, who again, like Kenny Pickett, I think it's going to be like one of those bottom half bottom half starters,
Mm-hmm.
top half backups for a long time in the NFL. Is like, again, it's like, I will never understand not drafting a quarterback that you don't have a lot of belief in, right? Unless it's, hey, these one of these guys who has insane traits, and it's like, hey, we got to work with him and be some patience. But that's not what Kenny Pickett ever was. So why did you
Never.
draft this cat in the first place?
No, no. He had a very, very low ceiling and a very high floor for a first round pick, right? You basically knew what you were getting when they drafted him out of Pitt. I suppose the other school of thought was do what the Packers did and put Jordan Love on layaway for years and have Aaron Rodgers bitch about that and not getting a wide receiver in the first round forever. Right? Like they were comparable situations. You saw what the Packers did. They had a guy sit on the bench for 3 years and then they trade Rodgers. Or you could do what Pittsburgh did, just wait until your quarterback says, "Yeah, no, this time I'm not joking. I'm really done." And now you're screwed. And you have to go get somebody, even if you don't love them. So that's that.
The weather might be cooling down, but the action on the field stays hot. And today we've teamed up with DraftKings, an official partner of the NFL, to get you closer to the action. Right now, new customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets instantly. So download the DraftKings app now and use promo code football today. Fan of multiple teams and want to bet on them all? Combine multiple bets together for a shot and even bigger payout. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, not to worry. You can still join in all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy Sports. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use promo code football today. Bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code football today, only at DraftKings Sportsbook. You'll be glad you did.
Last thing, bigger story this weekend to see if Baker Mayfield can lead the Bucks to a division crown with a win, or if the Rams get a win over your Giants and get some help from Pittsburgh over Seattle, and then LA makes the postseason in a year where a lot of people thought they were going to be a bottom five team.
To me, it's the Rams because, like, if they make the playoffs, you can argue they have the best quarterback in the NFC, right? And when you have the best quarterback in the NFC, you have a top coach in the NFL in Sean McVay. You got a nice, trio of weapons with, Kupp, Nakua, and Kyron Williams. And then you have, the best defensive player in the 21st century. Like, you can start buying in a little bit. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, it's about not necessarily beating the Giants because that'll be easy, but like making sure they're in the playoffs.
The look, somebody was going to win the NFC South, and we've talked glowingly about Baker Mayfield, he's done a remarkable job, and he's going to get a nine-figure bonus if they end up winning this weekend and taking that division. But somebody was going to win it, whether they end up 8-9, 9-8, whatever. That's fine. The Rams have been a remarkable story, and Matthew Stafford is playing great. In December, I think he's thrown 10 touchdowns and hasn't thrown a pick. Um, do you know who the last first-round pick of the LA Rams was?
This is really going to bother me. I should know this. Let's see. Defensive line, no. Linebacker, no. Corner. I don't know. I
How
don't
about
know.
this? He will be a
Was it
starting
Todd
quarter.
Gurley?
Nope, he will be a starting quarterback this weekend in the NFL.
Oh, Jared Goff. Okay.
2016. That was the
Gosh.
last first round pick they made, right? They traded a bunch for Jalen Ramsey, and then they traded out of first rounds and gave up a bunch for Goff, and then they gave up a bunch for Stafford. And so they just haven't had one. And it doesn't mean that first round picks are the end all be all, because I really believe the crux of your team and the foundation of your team is built a little bit later on in that draft. But they have knocked it out of the park in recent years, right? You talked about the two fifth-round picks in Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams, who have lit the world on fire offensively. But they've got some guys on defense that you don't know about. A Byron Young, who's a third-round rookie out of Tennessee. A
Mhm.
Kobe Turner, who is really developing on their front line, another third-round pick out of Wake Forest. So they have guys that are developing in front of their eyes. You mentioned McVay being a fantastic play caller. And I really thought that the Rams were going to be like a bottom 5 or 6 team this year.
I thought if Stafford would be healthy, kind of where they are right now.
Hmm.
Right now, the thing is, Stafford's health has been an issue for a while. Right, he's always even when he's played, he's been banged up in Detroit. And when Stafford's not healthy, his play dips
Yes.
because he still has some of that. He's still a gunslinger, right? And he throws a lot of interceptions historically in his career. I mean, the year they won the Super Bowl, he led the league in interceptions.
Hmm.
And then so when you're throwing those interceptions and maybe having 5, 6 less points per game because of the injury, it leads to some losses. But this is kind of where I had it, was like the 8 to 9 wins if Stafford could stay healthy, which he had. He actually got banged up in the middle of the season, I think, right?
Yeah, he missed the Green Bay game with a thumb.
So do you think him or Jalen Hurts is better? Look, basically, like who's the best QB in the NFC to you, as things stand?
I think Hertz's legs are as important as any body part in the NFC among quarterbacks in the playoffs, because if he had that little knee dinged up a few weeks ago, and if he doesn't give you that threat and that ability to get 3rd and 8, go get 9 yards, they're a different team. Um, so I think that that's more important.
I know we're not talking about the Eagles, but you brought up Hurts. At what point does this Eagles coaching is hurting the Philadelphia Eagles this year,
Mm.
right? Like I was listening to a Philly podcast because one of the guys I really respect was on it and talking about like they were playing the Giants and Wink Martindale, who blitzes a ton, right? And there's like they had no answers for like those all out blitzes, which is like that's when you face those, that's what you need. You need quick, easy answers for that. And I watched AJ Brown, right? Because our rookie first round corner, I'm like, oh, he held him to like 2 catches until he got
Hmm.
left the game in the third quarter. They just ran curl routes, like they ran like 20 curl routes with AJ Brown, and through the first 3 quarters of that game. They're not like where last year. That's what made them so great offensively, is that no matter what you did defensively, you had answers, right? If they blitz, we got answers for this. They drop back in a 4 deep zone, they just had answers for everything, and Jalen Hurts was running it perfectly. So I think Jalen Hurts is actually playing pretty well. His accuracy struggled a little bit under pressure,
Hmm.
but they don't have all the answers on offense that they had, which like the Rams are going to be well coached and ready for the playoffs. So I wonder, like, does anything switch with the Eagles? And their defensive issues are real too.
We'll find out. I mean, I still think that they're going to end up being the 2 seed based on that schedule with the Cardinals and then your Giants to wrap it up. But
Yeah, they will be the 2 seed. It's just like I think the Eagles Rams playoff game would be like I would struggle on who to pick in that game.
Yeah, I just don't know if you'll see that. I think the Rams will end up as the 6th seed.
Yeah, we want Lions Rams,
Yeah,
obviously, but
that would be great. Well, root for chaos. If you don't have a team that's still alive, go root for chaos because we want fun stuff that's going to unfold in Week 18 as well. Enjoy the. So what, you'll tune into the Giants Rams game. That's an early game on Sunday, right?
1 o'clock, one
Yeah.
o'clock, and then we finally hit the point of talking Giants where it's like, yeah, we are going to analyze. Like our preview pod, we didn't really talk about the Rams for this game, so we'll
Got
talk
it.
about the game and everything in it. But we are transitioning towards the end of the season.
Start focusing on that draft, brother.
Exactly.
I'll be there. All right, listen, everybody, enjoy your football fandom. We will not do a show on New Year's Day. We're going to do one right after that. So enjoy your college football as well on Monday because that's going to be a blast, those two semifinal games. For producer Mikey and Bobby Skinner from the Talking Giants world, I am Chris Rose. Have a happy, healthy New Year from everybody here on Football Today.